Hello and welcome to Modelling Misadventures. Now in this video I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to try and make a 3D printed version of a vintage toy robot. Now if you look at this picture here of me as a very young child, you can see that I had a tin robot that I used to play with. Now I found a model on Thingiverse which you can 3D print, and if it all works it's going to walk and talk. Now I've already 3D printed all the parts for this robot and you can see there's quite a lot of them. Head, body and legs and feet. And then over here we've got a motor mount, lots of gears and cogs. And over here we've got some things to fit onto the front and back of the body. Now all the parts for this robot are available for free on Thingiverse. They were designed by Robothut, who also has a YouTube channel, so go and check that out. But I think this is going to be a great little project. We'll have to just see how it goes together. Now to make this robot walk, you need a little electric motor, and it's designed for one of these. This is called a TT motor. It's got a 1/48 gear ratio in it and it runs off 6 volts, and the model is designed to have this fastened to it. So this motor goes onto this motor mount like that. I'm going to fasten it on with a couple of nuts and bolts. There we are, a couple of M3 bolts and some nylock nuts. Then we've got to put this gear on here on the shaft. That fits on quite nicely. Now this motor mount contains a set of gears, and it's a little bit complicated how this works because it's got a stop-start mechanism, and it all works based on these 2 gears here. You can see this one here on the side of it has this kind of a ramp, and this one here also has a ramp of a different shape. And the idea behind these is that one is fixed to a shaft and the other one can move in and out like this. And these have a different number of teeth, so they're going to rotate at slightly different speeds. Now when they come round like this, those 2 ramps are going to hit each other and push the gears apart. And that is going to disengage the walking mechanism, so the robot will stop. And then these will keep spinning at different rates. And when it reaches that point there, they'll snap back together. And that will re-engage the walking mechanism, so the robot will start walking again. And these will keep spinning at different rates until the ramps hit each other again, and then they'll separate, and then it'll stop walking. So these have to be fitted onto a shaft in a certain way to allow this movement of the 2 cogs to come in and out like that as they are both turning. Hopefully it'll become a little bit clearer when we put it together. Now the first gear with the ramp shaped like this goes onto this hexagonal shaft. It's going to get glued on, but we're going to test fit it first to make sure we get it in the right place. The other gear with the ramp shaped like this obviously won't fit onto the hex shaft, but this needs to be able to spin freely. So there's this little bushing here that fits in there, and now this gear can spin freely around the shaft like that. And then we're going to put this gear onto the shaft so that the 2 ramps can meet each other like this. And this is where this mechanism will allow them to separate. Now that sounds a bit rough. I'm just going to smooth it off a little bit, and I think it might need a little bit of lubrication, but that goes on there like that. Now I've smoothed those off and they're actually sliding apart a lot better. So that's the mechanism. Now to put this shaft in, you need another one of these little bushes that goes in there, in that hole, and that shaft goes in there. And these gears will now be turned by the motor shaft. So we just got to get this set up right so that the distance is correct. So you can see that shaft's just hitting on the yellow motor there. I'm going to pull it back just a touch, and that's where I'm going to glue this shaft, this cog onto the shaft. So I've glued those two gears on. These are the only ones that are fixed, the other ones move. So to assemble this, again we're going to put the bushing in there, put the shaft in there so that the gears engage. And then you need a little spring, which is going to go on here, and that's going to push the two gears together when they come back after separating. Once we've got all that lined up in there, I'm actually going to glue this onto here now, like that, with super glue. So that's the two halves of the motor mount joined together, and you can see the drive mechanism here, and that spring's working quite nicely. So next we've got to fit the drive shaft for the legs. So we're going to start putting these little bushes in there on either side. And then I'm going to push the drive shaft through here. And then there's a spacer that needs to go on. So that's going to go in here. Like that. And then the next thing to go on here is this drive gear. So that's going to go in there, snug fit. And then we've got to get the drive shaft through the center of it and out through the bush on the other side. There we go. And the last part of this is to glue these little cams onto this drive shaft here. They've got to be set at 180 degrees to each other so that the legs will walk properly. Now there we are. So this is the drive shaft for the legs, and these rotating cams are what are going to make the legs move. Now you can see that this cog is turning freely. When this pulls out here, those cogs will engage like that, and then the motor will turn this and make the legs walk, and when it springs back, this will stop and the robot will stop walking. Now this is a test run just to see if it works. I'm just going to connect it to a little battery pack. Right, so the drive shaft is turning, the two gears are turning, and at the moment they are locked together. And now they're coming to the point where they're going to start separating. So the two ramps have engaged and it's forcing the two gears apart, and now you can see the gear for the walking mechanism has started to turn. Now I can see a problem here already because the gear nearest to the motor is not staying true on its axis. You can see it's being forced out of alignment. So there's a bit of a problem there. It's still working, but I don't like the way that gear is rocking. And then you see it snap back together again. But I don't like the way that this gear here is rocking. And if I pull that out, you can see that this is very, very loose. So I'm not happy with how this is working and this gear here. So one good thing about 3D printing, you can have a second go. I'm going to print another one. I'm going to alter the length of this bush a little bit to see if it'll make this cog a little bit more stable. So, time for take two. Right, well I made a new one and printed it in grey this time, and you can see this one's working a lot better. Put some grease on it, and yeah, it's opening and closing really well. Very happy with this. You'll see it. It's turning the walking gear. The two cogs on the drive shaft are apart, and it's about to click back together. There we go. That's working great, isn't it? Now the next phase is to start putting all the parts together, and I've started off by spraying these with a grey filler primer because I'm going to actually paint this robot silver. And these parts are going to need sanding because they're a bit rough before we paint them, and just got to glue a panel onto the side of these feet as well. Now I'm going to paint the feet and hands red and the legs and body and head silver. I've done a bit of painting, so these are the feet painted in red, and these are body parts which I've painted in silver. So it's coming on. I'm going to start putting the feet together and the legs. So to make these feet, you're going to first of all glue that onto there, and then this is the other side of the foot, and that's going to go on there like that. Now we can put this foot together, and it's pretty straightforward. We've got a couple of ratchet parts here, a couple of wheels, 6 little rods, and parts of the leg. Now for those metal rods, I just used this 1/8 inch aluminium tube, and I've got a little tube cutter here which makes it very easy to cut those to the right length. So this one goes in first. It just really easy to get them in. They just slot in like that, nice and easy. The second one goes at the front, and the pointed end has to be facing down. Next we're going to put these little ratchet wheels on, and they have a little O-ring to go around there like that to give them some grip. It's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah, that's a nice design. For the O-rings, I just bought this little set from a car part store. And then these wheels go in here, nice and simple. And the front wheel goes in here. Now you've got to make sure with these wheels that the ratchet section is facing forwards like that. Now if you've assembled this right, you'll see that it will go forward on those wheels, but it won't go backwards because the ratchets catch. And you can see the mechanism there. Now the next part to go in is this leg support here, and again it just goes in with a little rod, and then we can put the leg over that inside section here, and that is held in place with the final rod. And once you've got all those pins in, we can glue the final side piece on. And here are the 2 legs. These look terrific. Now we're going to connect those legs to the gearbox, and all you need to do is put 2 rods in here, and the legs slide on actually really easily. They just go in there like that, and that cam fits in the top of the leg like that. All right, let's see if it works. Right, it's walking. Not going to beat Usain Bolt. Now for the next step, we're going to need these 3 parts here. We've got this strange looking gear, a little fixture, and another small little gear here. Now the purpose of these gears is that these are going to be actuated when the robot stops walking, and it's going to allow another function to be turned on. So first of all, you've got to put a little screw in here. And it needs to be in the bottom one. So that goes in there. I'm going to put a little nut on the other side. Now this bolt is actually the actuator arm, and it's going to raise and lower a rod when this cog comes into position. Now this gear is held in place with this part, which goes into there like that, and then this goes into that little hexagonal hole like that, and that can now rotate up and down like that. Now this little gear here fits onto this shaft here. Now this shaft comes in and out when the walking mechanism engages and disengages, and that's going to push that cog out to disengage this gear and push it back in to engage that gear and drive it up. So we glue that on and then see if the mechanism works. Now I've just tested this out, and this gear here impinges on the mechanism that goes up and down. And so now I've realized that actually you should use this gear. Doesn't say that in the instructions, but that's what I think you need to do to make this work properly. So I'm going to put this one on instead. So now I've replaced this gear, and you can see with this one, it will go up like that. But then when it falls down, there's nothing here getting in the way. And before, what was happening was, if you put this actuating lever on, as it came down, it was catching on the top of the gear. Now it's free to go all the way up and down. So hopefully this is going to show the mechanism working. Let's see. Yeah. So now it stopped walking, and that gear has actuated the other gear to go up. Now it's starting to walk, and it's fallen down. And now it's in the down position. Pretty good. Pretty good, that's not bad. Now for the next stage of this build, we're going to work on the arms. Here are the arms themselves. This is the gear that drives the arms. These fit onto the top of the legs and move backward and forward when the legs move. Then we've got a little clutch mechanism that's going to use an O-ring on here so that you can actually move the arms without moving the cogs. But before I put it together, I'm just going to paint these hands red. So I've got these hands painted, so now I can put these arms together. Now this is that friction clutch design. So you fasten these together, you can see the O-ring in the middle. Now I can actually turn this, it's quite stiff against the rubber. So the gear will turn the arm, but if you turn the arm and the gear is still, you'll be able to move the arm. So next we've got to glue these arm movers on here. They just get glued in there like that. Now there's a problem trying to put this one on this side because it's hitting this shaft that comes out to the side of the motor. So to fix that, I'm going to have to cut that shaft off. And that is that side on. All right, now it's time to join these arms to the body, and this goes on the inside and this gets glued on the outside. So this is what the arms look like when they're on. They're going to swing like that. You can see on the inside that cog moving. And if I hold the cog, I can still twist them because of that rubber O-ring. Very nice. Well, this robot is really coming on, and it's turning out to be a really successful design. I'm really impressed with it. The next thing is I've got to do a bit of electrical work because these holes here are for some LEDs. So I'm going to have to do some wiring up and also get the motor connected. So out comes the soldering iron. We'll do a bit of wiring and see if we can get that to work. Now I've got to say I don't really know what I'm doing here, but I'm going to start off just by, I've fastened this battery pack onto the back of here with some double-sided tape, and then I'm going to wire this switch into the circuit to the motor. That'll get the motor going, then I've got to think about the LEDs. Okay, so we'll start by soldering the black wire onto here. Now I've got the motor wired up, very simple circuit. So you've got the red wire coming from the battery pack to the switch, from the switch to the motor, and then from the motor back to the battery pack. And if we turn this on, you can see that it's all working quite nicely and the robot's walking along. Now the next challenge is to take some power off this circuit to power the LED lights. And to be honest, I've had to play around with this for quite a while and got into a bit of a problem and I couldn't get it to work. I'm going to talk you through the steps here to try and sort this out. Now my initial plan was to connect an LED light to these terminals here. So I'm just going to show you now what happens. So got a couple of leads here. We'll connect them up like that. And then on the other end, I've got an LED light. Now if I turn this on, turn the switch on, the mechanism is working, there's power to the motor, but nothing on the LED at all. So the next step was to see whether there was enough voltage coming out of those wires to drive the LEDs. So I've got a multimeter here and I'm going to connect it up and see what happens when I turn it on. So I've connected the multimeter to those wires. Let's turn it on. 5.5 volts. Now that is more than enough to drive these LEDs. Now I went to my local electronics store to see if they knew what was going on, and after a little bit of fiddling around, they came up with the idea to try this. This is a diode, and this makes sure that current can only flow in one direction through a circuit. Let's see what happens when we put this in. So now I've got power coming from here through the diode and then onto the LED. And let's see what happens this time when we turn the switch. And it's working. So I don't know quite why that is required, but it does appear that I'm going to have to put that diode into this circuit to make these LEDs work. I've soldered the diode into that wire and I'm going to just cover it with a little bit of heat shrink tubing. There we are. Now I can solder this wire back on here. Now these two wires that come off the motor now, this is where the diode is. And these are going to be my positive and negative wires for all the LEDs. And I'm going to wire these in parallel. So every LED will be connected to this and to this. Now the first set of LEDs are going to go in the front of the body like that. But the problem I've got is that these two halves have to separate before you connect them on. And there's going to be lots of loose wires. So I think I'm going to use one of these radio control servo connectors for my wiring, and that means I'll be able to wire the two halves together, and then when I put them on the body I should just be able to slide that in there like that and clip them together. So first of all I'm just going to glue these LEDs on there with a little blob of super glue. Now I've glued these in so that the positive terminal is on the top on both of them. So these are going to be connected to the positive wire and the bottom ones are going to be connected to the negative. So I'm just going to bend them a little bit so that they have one wire above and one wire below. Now they're a bit long, so I'm just going to cut them down Now I'm really just making this up as I go along. I hope there's no electronic experts watching, because they'd probably be horrified with what I'm doing here, but this is how I'm going to try and wire this up in parallel. So I've just cut the wires here and soldered the ends together, and the same here, and then I'm going to solder these onto the terminals of the LEDs. I've got no idea if this is going to work. So this is what I've ended up with here. I've got the connector here, and then the red and the brown wire going to the terminals on the LEDs. The red ones here are soldered onto the positives and the brown onto the negatives, and then the wires continue on then up into the head to power the LEDs in the head. Well, here we go. This is the moment of truth, isn't it? This is a test run of this setup. Let's see what happens when I turn on the motor. Oh yes, it works. There we go. Now I've got all these LEDs in the body wired up, and I'll just show you how I've done it, because I made a decision that I wanted to be able to take this robot apart rather than gluing it all together. So what I've done is I've put a number of these connectors on here so that I can actually connect the wires up and then disconnect them if I take it apart. So if we look at this part here, at the back here we've got a set of connectors, and that is going to connect up to the connector there on the main body. And then I have another connector here which connects the two halves of the body together, like that. And then when you turn this on, I'm hoping that these lights are going to flash. There you go. Flashing lights. So it all works, and if I ever needed to repair it, I can take the two halves of the body apart and it all comes apart like that. So I'm pretty happy with that. This is the last bit of wiring that I'll need to do, and that goes up to the head, but that's for the next stage. But all of this bit on the body is all done. So now I can fit this left hand side of the body onto here and try and fit that switch into that hole. Now we've got to slide this on further so that those two rods come out of these holes here. Like that. Now we've got to put this actuating rod on here, and this fits on there, sits on top of that gear, and I'm going to fasten that on with a nylock lock nut, like that. Now we can fasten the right hand side on, and this just needs these two connectors connecting up, one at the front for the LEDs and the one at the back for the power supply. Like that. And then this can be slid on over everything else and over those metal rods. And that goes together like that. Now, it's been designed to be glued together, but if you did that, you'll never be able to get to the insides if anything breaks down. So I'm actually going to find a way of fastening this together without gluing it. Now I printed 3 parts here to fasten the two sides of this body together. First of all, this neck collar, and I'm going to glue that onto the bottom of the head, and that will hold the top of it together. And then I have 3D printed these 2 little clips, and these hold the bottom of it together. So the neck collar goes on here like this, and that holds the top of it together. And the longer of these 2 pegs goes in this section here and holds the back together like that, and the shorter pin goes in the front section like that. And those three parts hold the two halves of the body together quite nicely. So let's just see where things are at when we turn this on. And it's working quite nicely. The robot's walking, the arms are moving, and all the LEDs are flashing. Now the next part of this build is to work on the head. This head has two LEDs for the eyes and one behind the mouth. And I printed off this, what's called a diffuser, a very thin sheet of red filament, and I'm going to put that inside the mouth just to make that look a bit more realistic. So I've glued the red diffuser in there and it looks pretty good. Next I'm going to glue this red LED into that little slot down at the bottom there. And there we go. So I've made this little wiring cradle for the head. So I've put a connector on here which is going to connect to the power coming in. And then these three ends are going to go to the three LEDs in the head. So I'll be able to disconnect the power supply to the head and take the head off, just like I can with the body. So those are the wires soldered onto the bottom LED. Now I've just glued the LEDs into the eye sockets. That's what it looks like now it's all wired up. So the three LEDs all wired together in parallel, and then I've got these two connectors here to connect it to the power coming up from the body. So the next thing on this head is we've got to build this mouth mechanism. So this is a pivoting jaw, and is kept in place by a little weight, and it pivots on this spindle. So we'll see how that goes together. That was pretty good, doesn't it? Now to stop that mouth from dropping open like that, you have to glue this counterweight onto the shaft inside. Now that circular hole in there is designed to take a coin, but I'm assuming it's an American coin because this Australian coin won't fit in it. So I'm going to use a 10-gram weight that's used for balancing car wheels, like that. Now there is room to put a sound module in this head, and I've actually ordered one off Amazon, but it's going to take a couple of months to come. So I'm not going to complete that stage in this video, but it's going to go in here sitting on the top, and there's a hole there for the speaker to go. This is the top of the robot's head. And again, this is designed to be glued on, but what I've done is 3D printed this fitting here, which I'm going to glue onto the bottom. And that will allow me to then just lift the head cap on and off, so I can get to the electrics inside. And that's the finished head cap, painted, and that just slots in there like that. Now the next stage of this construction is to do something about the front of the robot here. Now on the original files that you download, there is actually some detail on here. But I wanted to personalize my robot, so I removed those details on the slicer, and I created these two front panels. I made these on Tinkercad, just quite simple little computer designs, and this is going to be put on here once it's been painted. Now, if you want to know why there's a letter D in the middle of that, you'll have to wait for a future video when all will be revealed. But for now, I'm going to work on painting those, and then I'm going to screw them onto the front like that, or should I say like that. Well, that's the front plates on, and now I'm going to do a bit of painting on these. Well, this is my attempt at painting the front. I've used the same colours as those flashing lights. So now I'm actually going to do a little bit of weathering and wear and tear to try and make this look a bit more old. Now I'm going to do this using these oil paints. dissolved in Zippo lighter fluid to make a very thin paint, basically a wash. Now I've just squirted some brown and black onto some kitchen roll, and it'll actually soak some of the oil out of the paint, make it dry a bit better, and it's going to then be mixed in with that lighter fluid. I'm just using this to highlight some of the details, so these edges and corners, I'm just going to put a little bit in here, and it'll just make them stand out a little bit. Well, we finally got to the end of this project, and I finished painting and weathering him, and here he is. So there is the finished article. Now, I have made a number of modifications to this robot that you won't find on the original 3D print files. So I've made it so that the robot can be dismantled. So I can remove the top of his head, I can remove his head, I can remove these front plates and take the two halves of the robot apart to get inside it. I modified the front details. This is new, this is new. I also redesigned the battery cover. So again, just put some new designs on there. And I painted and weathered him. So really happy with how this robot has come out. It's a fantastic design. All credit to Robothut for designing this and putting it up on Thingiverse. And with that, I'm going to leave you with some close-up pictures of him working and some still photos of the details. And it's time for me to say goodbye, and I'll see you next time on Modelling Misadventures.